Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Good to see everyone.
Mhm.
You didn't do your hair today.
What's up?
I said, you didn't do your hair today.
I did my hair. I just happened to do it in a ponytail.
Oh, well, all right.
There you go.
I didn't do mine today, so whatever.
It's getting to be that length of hair.
Me too.
I haven't experimented with the self haircut or amateur haircut like a lot of people have been doing. So.
Just
I don't
let it
want to
go.
see it look like it's going to. I just don't want to see whatever it's looking like.
Well, I thought since we hadn't talked about it for a while, that vitamin D was a good topic to tackle today because it's been in the news quite a bit, and I always think it's interesting when you hear vitamins in the news because um, there can be a let's see there can be a I'm going to mute everyone just to limit the background noise, but feel free to either ask questions in the chat or unmute yourself if you have a question. What was I saying? So I think it's always interesting when vitamins are in the news because it can feel like there's like a vitamin of the day or a supplement of the day, and all these supplements come out with differing either positive stories about how they're associated with better health outcomes, or some negative stories like how their absorption is not what we want them to be, or you are creating expensive urine by taking a bunch of supplements and all of that. So, and there's some truth on both ends of the spectrum, honestly. So, but vitamin D is really interesting. It's been a topic for years now, really, where we've noticed that by far the majority of Americans are suboptimal in their vitamin D levels. And well, of course, you hear differing statistics, but 40% in kind of uh, seems to be about the best estimate of people who are frankly deficient in vitamin D. So if you can imagine 40% are frankly deficient, the amount of people who are really not optimized in their vitamin D levels is huge, 70 to 80%, some people say. So one of the reasons that vitamin D is so interesting is that it's really in some ways misclassified as a vitamin. It acts more like a hormone than a true vitamin. And so hormones in general are big players in the body, right? So they are involved in a lot of different processes. They have negative and positive feedback loops where the more you use them, the more your body will produce, and they can down regulate, up regulate. And so vitamin D is really a fat soluble hormone. And the fat soluble part is interesting because honestly, in medical school, we were always taught that, vitamins A, D, E, and K, those are the fat soluble vitamins. And really, we shouldn't see deficiencies in fat soluble vitamins in theory because our body can store them. And so you figure, we all have a little couple fat cells for a rainy day hanging around. So why aren't we storing up sufficient vitamin D? And we also learned a little bit of a healthy respect for having levels that are too high of fat soluble vitamins for that reason. You can, you're not as likely to excrete them through urine. And so you can get vitamin toxicity of those vitamins. As it turns out, vitamin D it's very hard to have toxic levels of vitamin D. It's very difficult, and we really don't see that commonly at all. And I think that's one of the reasons we can feel very confident in, one, the data that shows that so many people are suboptimal, and two, it's really hard to get those levels to a toxic range. We can feel comfortable in recommending widespread supplementation of vitamin D. So usually when I describe what vitamin D is involved in, even I kind of, you have to giggle because it sounds like, everything but the kitchen sink, because it's true. There are vitamin D receptors on white blood cells. There are vitamin D receptors in the whole chain of bone and muscle metabolism, our neurotransmitters that are involved in regulating mood, energy, metabolism, pancreas related to insulin sensitivity and blood sugar regulation. So just so many things, right? And because it's involved in so many things, when you see a list of symptoms of low vitamin D, it can be all over the board. And honestly, we don't really, you can't hang your hat on symptoms when it comes to knowing if you're deficient or not. The most common symptoms that we see, and really we can only have a confidence in hindsight where we say, okay, let's test your vitamin D, you're deficient, supplement and see what improves. We can have some level of confidence in that connection. But the symptoms that we see improve the most are kind of general things like energy, mood, general kind of aches and pains. Those are the ones that tend to stick out the most in the way of symptoms. But there are tons of studies, linking vitamin D to a lot of other dysfunctions, from connection to autoimmune conditions, risk of cancer. You'll hear numbers thrown around of like even increased morbidity and mortality, all caused with low vitamin D. So to some degree, we have to have a level of not skepticism, but we have to know kind of what data is what data. And just because something's associated with just because low vitamin D, for example, is associated with certain conditions doesn't necessarily mean that causal connection is there. And I think that's what you'll hear a lot in the news these days related to COVID-19. So there's a lot in the news about, gosh, when we track vitamin D levels, the morbidity and mortality associated with those people with low vitamin D seems to be a lot worse with COVID-19. And on the one hand, like I said, that's a causal or that's a correlation. It doesn't necessarily indicate a causal relationship. But then if we take that a step further, we just have to kind of lean on common sense to say, okay, we have this causal relationship and we know the solid science and physiology behind how vitamin D is involved in the immune system, and the fact that vitamin D receptors are present on white blood cells and are involved in immune system activation, to say that's all the information we need to make reasonable recommendations that everyone should be aware of what their vitamin D level is and likely be supplementing. So, so I think, we have to be careful when things hit the headlines and people say, oh, now everybody's just trying to, scare us with vitamin D. It's like, no, we have to really focus on what makes us resilient in this time, both emotionally resilient and physically resilient. And so if we can do anything that helps optimize our immune system, whether that means sleep the appropriate amount, deal with our stress the appropriate amount, drink the appropriate amount of water, or taking, vitamin D seriously, then, that's a solid recommendation. So how do we get vitamin D? Like I said, we are It's a fat soluble vitamin. So our body is meant to maintain stores of it. It's actually meant to make its own vitamin D when the skin is exposed to sunlight. And so it's even more interesting why, people are so deficient. But we, of course, in this area of the country, we just frankly don't get enough sunshine days to maintain vitamin D, it seems. There's a little bit of a nuance in what kind of stimulation from sun and how much results in good vitamin D production. Has to do with UVB rays as opposed to UVA rays, for example. There's, you know what, let me make sure I can see something. Okay, sorry about that. So it really does take high intensity sun to get enough UVB rays, but it does not take very long. Some studies recommend even 10 to 20 minutes, but on a daily basis of sun exposure. That does not have to mean exposed, like you're going to the beach or anything like that. Honestly, just exposed face, chest, arms, or arms, legs, in theory, should help us produce enough vitamin D. Of course, we have to balance that with sun risk, and there's a lot of conversation about, the effect of sunscreens and are we actually overprotecting from the sun? It is true that sunscreens block UVB and decrease our ability to make vitamin D. I don't know, honestly, that everybody's out there, protecting themselves with all full body sunscreen every day. But I do think there are multiple factors in both the amount of sun we get in this area of the country. There's some ozone research that affects how much UVA versus UVB we get. And then honestly, just lifestyle, right? I joke that I'm an indoor girl, but we're indoor people much more than in yesteryear. So when you think about daily habits of, getting into your car in the garage and driving to work and walking into work and being inside and going home and driving into your garage and getting out, just that daily micro dose of vitamin D, of sunshine, we're not getting as much as we used to. So safe sun exposure is number one. There are a few natural food sources of vitamin D, but it's really, food isn't meant to necessarily be our primary source of vitamin D. It's interesting that when I talk about vitamin D, there is one topic that comes up the most, and people often look at me like with this guilt-ridden, look, and they say, "Oh, I don't drink milk." And it's just so funny because it's like we're kindergartners again, right? When your mom's saying, "Drink your milk, drink your milk." But milk, it is true that milk is a source of vitamin D, but really only because it's fortified with vitamin D. So the majority of milk, unless you are getting like raw, natural, straight from the cow kind of milk, that goes through that processing, and then they add back vitamin D to it. So if they're adding a vitamin to your milk in the store, then you might as well just take vitamin and not worry about having to down the milk. And I know I've talked with a lot of you about milk in general. I always say, God bless the dairy farmers. They are very good at their marketing with the milk mustaches and all of that. But milk is not great for everyone, and it is perfectly designed to make babies grow quickly. And so in a lot of ways, we live our adult life trying not to grow quickly. So, so we can get all of our nutrients that we need separate from milk. So I never want people feeling guilty about not drinking their milk, because you can get calcium from other sources and certainly vitamin D from other sources. That being said, people who tolerate milk, they have the enzyme that digests milk. They have plenty of that. They don't have reaction to it, and it's not, they can incorporate it in small doses, then that's no problem. But the majority of people, I would venture to say, don't necessarily benefit a lot from getting their nutrients through milk. But I'm going off on a tangent on milk, poor milk. So the most natural sources of vitamin D in foods tend to be eggs, for one, egg yolks, and fish, oilier types of fish. So salmon, mackerel, tuna. A lot of people, cod and cod liver oil, like supplementing, taking cod liver oil was a thing that kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. I can't imagine like downing cod liver oil, but let me know if you do that, because I will give you a prize if you're able to tolerate cod liver oil. But so really fish and eggs. Interestingly, mushrooms are about the only vegetable that have like a decent source of vitamin D. I don't know where they got their power, but different types of mushrooms have a decent amount of vitamin D. So it never hurts to incorporate those in healthy ways. But other than that, I have to say, as much as I'm a food first kind of person, pretty much everyone should be taking a vitamin D supplement in my estimation. I think, I don't know, over the past, it's probably been about 5 years, 7 years. I don't know. I've been in practice 15 years. I don't know, a good amount of time that I've been checking vitamin D levels as part of just annual routine blood work for everyone. I, in one case, have had the number of a number that was higher, that was alarming to me. And ironically, it was a friend of mine who was accidentally supplementing. She was breastfeeding at the time. She was, there was a pharmacy error on her supplement, and she was taking 10,000 units a day for a decent long period of time instead of 10,000 a week. And so that got her levels pretty high. So naturally, honestly, I've never seen someone have like toxic levels. And I would say, if I had to throw out a guesstimate of people that are even kind of like optimal without supplementing, I mean, I can count them on less than 2 hands over the years, I tell you, even if it's just, the vitamin D from a multivitamin. So in general, I usually tell people everyone can be comfortable with the amount of vitamin D that is typically in a multivitamin, plus an additional either 1,000 or 2,000 units a day. Even without having results of your vitamin D levels, I would feel comfortable taking that amount, which would usually, a general multivitamin has about 500 or 1,000. So that's, 2,000 to 3,000 units a day. You can feel comfortable taking that amount. Oftentimes, even with that amount, I will have people, to increase levels of vitamin D, they'll be on anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 units a day. So, and that's in those situations, we're looking at levels, knowing that we have room to increase quite a bit and increasing those levels. So, as far as which supplements to use, I never want people like paying $1 million for their supplements. But I'm sure a lot of you have heard, the controversies related to supplements. They are definitely not regulated in the same way that even, medications are regulated by the FDA. Medications have to have, clinical trials behind them. They have to have absorption studies. and all the way through from, petri dish to human trials. And supplements really just don't have to have that. So some of the, exposés that you'll hear on the, Dateline NBC of when they're checking vitamins, I have no doubt that there are vitamins out there that one, what they say is in the vitamin is indeed in there, but it's packaged in such a way that your body is not going to absorb it, so it doesn't do you any good. And so those, I would say, are like the well-meaning companies that think they're doing a good job at like getting you the vitamin because they have confirmed that the vitamin is in there, but they just don't realize that you have to have the absorption studies. Then there's another, category. As much as I'm a eternal optimist, there's another category of supplements where they're just not even confirming that in their production process, what's in there is in there. That definitely has been shown, and whether they thought they put it in there at the beginning and it just didn't have the shelf life, or whether they're just, bad players in the game, who knows, but that definitely is an issue. So when it comes to vitamin D, every vitamin really is a little bit nuanced in how easy it is to get from supplement in your body in a meaningful way. So some supplements, or vitamins or minerals have like a very good shelf life and are very easily absorbed, aren't dependent on a lot of other vitamins or nutrients to get absorbed. And so vitamin C is an example. Like vitamin C is pretty easy to absorb. There's a lot of, supplements out there that we know are decently absorbed. Vitamin D, by nature, mostly because of its fat solubility, is a little bit tougher. And so the best forms that I've found, probably the best, is a liquid. And what you'll notice in vitamin D liquids is it's, I should have brought my an example here. But you'll notice that the liquid vitamin D it's more like an oil than a true water. And the one that I use is by a company called Orthomolecular, and we can order those wholesale. So if anybody needs some of that, we have that here. But it's an oil that is tasteless, colorless. You just put, dropper full, is about 5,000 units a day. I usually tell people it sounds great to say that something is tasteless and colorless until you realize that by definition, if something doesn't taste like anything, it tastes bad. So you kind of have to use your dropper full and chase it with some water. But so liquid is definitely best. For most people, we have found that if you look for kind of separate vitamin D supplements, for most people, when you take a vitamin D with vitamin K, specifically vitamin K2, then it is better absorbed, as well as the clinical efficacy of it will be better. That is especially true in people that don't get a lot of vitamin K in their diet. Vitamin K is prominently found in those like deep green leafy vegetables. So if you're not doing a serving of spinach and broccoli and like just deep greens, then you're usually better to take your vitamin D with K2, and it usually comes just in one formulation. The only caveat to that I would mention would be anyone, and I'm screening who is here that I know. Nobody, it doesn't apply to anyone on this phone call, but vitamin K in general is involved in clotting functions. And so some people have to be on certain blood thinners, certain types of blood thinners, then there's a theoretical interaction there, but it's such a minuscule amount of vitamin K and just K2. I think there's like 9 different subtypes of vitamin K. So this is just vitamin K subtype 2. So, so liquid is best. Vitamin D with K2 is best. Second best to liquid would be a gel cap. So the version that I prescribe often for people that if their insurance is going to cover vitamin D for them is a gel cap. And literally when you look at that gel cap, you know how there's those capsules where you can see the 2 different parts, and technically you can unscrew that capsule really easily, but it's a teeny tiny capsule and you can see the oil in there. So it's really just they put the oil in the capsule and it's absorbed. So a gel cap would definitely be the next best. And then from there, quite honestly, I would not waste any moolah on a tablet or a pill or, any other kind of, vitamin D. You're just not going to get the absorption. In theory, some of I guess probably I could add a third ranking in there. I'm thinking of my multivitamin that I take, which is a capsule, and inside that capsule is a powder, and that's that loose powder inside the capsule is pretty well absorbed. But it doesn't. You have to take, if you're going to take it that way, you need to take it with something that has some fat in it to help it absorb. So that's probably more than you ever wanted to talk about, vitamin D3 and subtypes of vitamins and all of that. But I wanted y'all to feel, reassured in, what you're hearing on the news and all of that. And it's definitely, worthwhile when it comes to feeling a little more confident, like, okay, my vitamin D levels are where they need to be. Any questions about vitamin D? Miss Joe, I'll unmute you. You're ready to roll.
Okay, my vitamin D I take is underneath the tongue. And it's an oil.
Perfect. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Technically, I think in a lot of circumstances we say, let things dissolve under your tongue. That's particularly true of B vitamins. You don't necessarily have to let it sit there very long to absorb vitamin D. So don't torture yourself.
Okay, thank you.
But
I needed to hear that.
Yeah, I put mine under my tongue only so I don't have to, because I don't have taste buds there, and I don't have to gag. So,
okay.
Yep. What other questions? The other thing, I don't want to talk your leg off today, but I think just in general, it's interesting as I'm involved in kind of listening to what is happening nationwide and what the treatment and prevention protocols are that are being put out for specifically related to COVID-19. I'm just, have to respect the silver lining that's happening in all of this, one of the silver linings, which is a real recognition of, I don't even know what to call it. I hate to call it integrative medicine. It's more like just a very natural approach to medicine, and a respect for really baseline physiology. Because what's happening, what happens when you have a new virus that is behaving, unlike other viruses is, physicians and scientists can't go to an algorithm and say, oh, this is what we're supposed to do. And this is what we have studies on, right? And so to a large degree, there's a lot of doctors out there going back to the physiology books and saying like, okay, we know this helped in this way because this has, plays on this specific viral receptors. And now we know in the lab that there's a common receptor to COVID-19 so that we can extrapolate that this will work too. And you really get down to the nitty gritty of the science behind how the body works. And in that nitty gritty is where you do come down to a lot of what is basic nutrition and sleep and hydration, and really respecting like, okay, what can vitamin C do? What can vitamin D do? What can some of these natural anti-inflammatories like N-acetylcysteine and glutathione and all these really rich anti-inflammatories, what role do they have to play? How does melatonin work? And that actually, for the majority of the population, will, in my estimation, will get us farther more quickly than a hydroxychloroquine or remdesivir or all these, fancier antivirals. Those, at least right now, until we have study, those are things that are really being used, in the ICUs with very severe, severe patients, that you need to know things like what's your kidney function, what's your liver function, what's your heart rhythm doing, to be able to use those things safely. Whereas, by far the majority of people, when you are sick at home and you're kind of writing out an illness, whether it's, coronavirus or not, you can feel a sense of confidence in supporting yourself with, some of these more natural protocols, like increasing your vitamin C and, Mucinex and acetylcysteine, melatonin, there's just a lot of those. Hopefully, and I'm going to revise it, I think, this weekend, but hopefully everyone received by email. I think it's probably been a couple of months since I sent it out. It was really when things first were starting. I sent out except to Frank, because Frank's email, to get through on Frank's email is like, he must be a CIA agent or something. I'm going to send yours by carrier pigeon, Frank. Oh wait, I think you might be muted.
There we are. Okay.
Okay.
You're right. I tried again today and I got nothing.
I think
Judy gets everything. I've got nothing. So
yeah.
And
Judy,
we have the same system.
Judy just wants you to have to ask her to get it, I think.
I think you're right. That's a control mechanism.
Oh my God. But so anyway, I sent out a PDF that I forget what I called it. It was like COVID-19 tip sheet or something on just home care stuff, both for prevention and treatment. And the treatment stuff really applies to, almost every viral illness, with a little caveat, with some of these typical supplements that we've known have a good immune response or a good immune support. There's been some hesitation, specifically related to COVID-19. And the one that comes to mind the most is elderberry, right? So elderberry is just a very natural, it's elderberry, it's food, right? But then they kind of distill it down and in a concentrated form, you can take it as a supplement. It's a wonderful nutrient. It has a lot of great properties. It is one of those things that early on in the immune response can kind of activate your immune response. So for a lot of people, what they would find is, that situation where you just kind of start to feeling like, oh, I'm coming down with a little something. They could start their emergency you know, is a brand name that is common that has things like echinacea, zinc, vitamin C. There's some elderberry formulations. So some of those are really geared towards like helping the immune system activate. And so those things are really good early on in illness. But as we've talked about before on here a little bit, part of the miscue with COVID-19 for people who are really, really sick is that what they call cytokine storm, where you get a rush of inflammatory agents that can cause system damage, really. And so there's been some theoretical concern of like, okay, are people who take a good amount of those things like elderberry that are specifically geared towards activating the immune system, would you be more likely to have that cytokine storm? So I think where that is playing out at this point is definitely still fine to take in prevention. You know, some people take kind of a low dose as a preventive supplement, probably even still fine to take in like early, maybe I have a little something, but I feel fine kind of stages. But in times where you're feeling sick, then I would not recommend elderberry in that circumstance. So, but anyway, what I was getting back to say, I'll update that, document it, and send it out this weekend, just so you all can have a little more information about specific protocols that seem to be responsible and seem to be effective both in prevention and if you are sick. So
elderberry is good in prevention, but not good in when you're actually sick.
extreme illness, yeah. And that's really specific to COVID-19. I can't even say that that's specific to like the common cold or something like that. So, because it's in, I don't have it here. One of the more popular supplements that has good study behind it is one called Virusid. And it has a decent dose of elderberry, and we've always used it for colds and influenza and things like that. But there's just that little caveat to COVID-19 and its inflammatory response that makes us say, maybe we don't want to hit that too hard. So. Kristen mentioned earlier about the vitamin D3 oil that she uses it, and it truly has no flavor. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just wimpy because it has no flavor, but it's, I don't know. Doesn't taste good either.
That's
So,
no.
what other questions can I answer? Oh,
And
yes.
how about, how much vitamin C should we be taking?
Vitamin C is interesting. For a prevention dose, well, you always want to take it in 500 milligram increments. Some studies show you really can't absorb more than 500 milligrams at a time. Some would say a gram, but 500 milligrams safely. But from a prevention perspective, taking 1,000 milligrams a day is decent. When for sickness, those numbers are shooting up. Like the IV infusions of vitamin C, they're doing, 20 grams a day, or, just like big numbers. But those, obviously they're also monitoring kidney function and ensuring adequate hydration and all of that. So I shared on here before, so I'll share again. My nephew, who was very sick, and he's 21, and he's type 1 diabetic, and he was sick. I mean, he was down for a good 2 weeks of like in bed, high fevers. And there's this time frame, of course there's variations, but from it seems that if we look at trends, there's this time frame of like day 10-ish, like
Mhm.
8 to 12, but 10-ish, that almost seems like if you're going to get better, you're going to turn the corner. If it's not going to go well, it's gonna, and you've probably heard stories of that. So, here he is on like day 10. He's in Houston, so I couldn't like put eyes on him, but day 10, and his fever is still 103, 104, and he's monitoring his pulse ox, and it's starting to go down. And everything as a physician makes you freak out, because that is my baby nephew, who, even though he's 21, is still like my baby. I watched him be born kind of baby. And so he was taking vitamin C, but he was only taking, because he's 21 and a guy, he was not listening to me. He was only taking like 2 grams a day. And I said, I want you to take 500 milligrams every hour with 8 ounces of water, every 500 milligrams every hour. And of course, this is why anecdotal evidence isn't extremely valuable, because one story is one story. And like I said, the trend is day 10 of either you kind of turn the corner or not turn the corner. Who knows if he would have turned the corner, even without doing this. But within 24 hours of him doing that increased dose of vitamin C, his fever had broke. And I talked to him the next day. He goes, "Oh, that vitamin C is good stuff. That really did the trick, Aunt Paige." So again, who knows, because we can't, study that. I think I just, looked like a hero by coincidence a little bit, but it definitely, it's just one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory, medicines that we have, that also has positive immune benefits. There's honestly nothing more complex than the immune system in general. And there's nothing more complex than the inflammatory response. And so it's hard to make generalizations, and we throw around terms anti-inflammatory pretty loosely. Like Motrin is an anti-inflammatory, vitamin C is an anti-inflammatory. They work in a lot in different ways even. So, but that's the deal with vitamin C. So, any other questions? Thank you, Kimmy, for joining us. You are very welcome. Well, I don't want to chat your ear off, but I do, if anybody's comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear what's going well these days, and what y'all are doing that's making you stay sane and stay energetic and healthy, even if you want to put it in the chat or shout yourself out. I'm going to unmute everyone. Remember how. Unmute all. Okay, everybody's unmuted. So mute yourself back if you need to, but if you want to share.
Quick question, Paige, is there too much vitamin C that you can take?
Yeah, in theory, for long periods of time, you do not want to be taking above 2 grams a day. Some people say 2 to 4 grams a day. But like I said, in the setting of like treatment of illness, they're using hefty doses. I personally think there's not a lot of value to taking more than 1 gram a day preventively, broken up 500. And then we can, we have room to kick it up if you're sick.
Thank you.
Cassie, good question. I feel a little, I honestly, and I may go back to the drawing board these days. So I went through a lot of process of like, okay, how do we figure out these brands? There's 5 gazillion million different brands. Um, and so I did a lot of research 2 or 3 years ago and landed on a brand that we decided to stock in the office called Orthomolecular. So I can send you a link with their stuff because they have the highest quality that I found at a decent price. But I don't know, I used to know a brand that was widely available over the counter, like at Whole Foods and grocery stores and things. But I don't know a brand that is great in that arena. There's a website called labdoor.com, like LABDOOR.com. And they basically are kind of a policeman of brands. They test a bunch of brands and kind of rate them as a third party. And that's how you know you're getting a decent brand, is that the FDA doesn't require it, but they proactively at least use a third party to do clinical tests and to do absorption studies, to do purity studies consistently. And so so that website has a bunch of information about brands that have kind of passed their test. But Orthomolecular is a great brand that you can find. It is one of those brands that is only available through like recommendation by a physician. And I used to kind of think that was a bunch of like hooey, to have that extra door. But I think they have so many products that really are clinical grade products that they say, they have a formulation that they've studied for high blood pressure, for example, and they've studied for glucose regulation, for example. They wouldn't necessarily want everybody taking that formulation because it really is geared towards a specific like elements of your physiology. So they really treat themselves as a prescription. So Kimmy, that's a question. Zinc is another one of those, is like the tried and true, well-studied immune regulators. And that was one of the first pieces of literature that came out related to COVID-19 in particular, was how well zinc tended to perform. And to the point where you like couldn't find zinc melts anywhere. I don't even know if you can find them still, but taking a baseline dose of zinc is a good thing. And then it's one of those things like vitamin C that if you kind of feel something coming on, you can increase the dose of it. But it's a good one. If I had to, kind of the top studied supplements related to immune function tend to be vitamin C, zinc, echinacea, elderberry, vitamin D. Melatonin is an interesting one. You hear about it for sleep all the time, but it's very specific to COVID-19 and really has awesome responses related to it. And I honestly don't even know all the basic science behind that. There's some receptors that the virus shares that melatonin can hit. So that's interesting. So yeah. Anything else? All righty. Well, I will send out more information this weekend, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their week. Awesome. Bye, everybody.